just going to introduce it.
There you go.
No, we're just going to.
We'll call the committee hearing to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time, which unfortunately they just called votes. So we may call a recess here in about 5 or 6 minutes, matter of fact. They've already called votes and we're down to 12 minutes left in the vote. So I think what we're going to do is myself and Mr. Cleaver, the ranking member, will have opening statements. We will then recess. We've got 4 votes. Probably would take about 45 minutes probably to do that. We'll come back, and at that time we will begin the discussion and begin the questions. So with that, let me just continue on. The hearing is entitled The Future of Housing in America, Federal Housing Reforms That Create Housing Opportunity. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing before the committee today. We'll look forward to your questions and insightful comments. And I now recognize myself for 3 minutes to give an opening statement. This panel represents a diverse cross-section of the housing community. We have a realtor, a home builder, a nonprofit executive, a public housing authority director, a witness specialized in affordable housing development, and housing policy experts. There's a common bond that links these individuals, the mission to provide housing to Americans, to provide the foundation for better lives and build better communities. Many of these witnesses share another commonality, the desire to see changes in federal programs so they can more easily serve the families in need. That's why this committee solicited organizations like the ones represented today for ideas on how to cut red tape and replace it with opportunity. I'm proud to have introduced H.R. 3700, the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act of 2015. I'll be the first to point out that this legislation won't necessarily change the world. It won't end homelessness overnight or meet the overwhelming need for affordable housing, but it's a first step in the long journey to reforming our housing system. And we got to take a first step before we can get a second step, right? It does represent an opportunity to show that despite rhetoric and what goes on around here daily, Congress can work together and in collaboration with a diverse group of stakeholders to foster a positive change. I also want to point out that Chairman Hensling has asked for additional ideas in the fight against poverty and for a reformed housing system. I know the chairman wants to hear ideas from the different points of view in different parts of the country. This is another opportunity to make your voice heard and participate in the process, and I encourage you to take advantage of it. One morning, the full committee will hold a hearing to examine 50 years of HUD and the impact to the department has had on our nation. 50 years later, too many Americans are in need with too few resources to be had. We are past the time to act. It's my hope that the spirit of bipartisanship will last long enough for after H.R. 3700 has been signed into law, that we can all work together to discuss additional reforms to HUD and the Rural Housing Service. The status quo is no longer good enough. The majority of provisions in H.R. 3700 were agreed to years ago by advocacy and industry groups. It's time Congress put these changes on the President's desk. I want to thank, again, the witness for appearing today, and we look forward to discussion. And with that, I recognize the gentleman from Missouri, the ranking member, Mr. Cleaver. 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the panel giving us your time. And in the spirit of trying to get there in time to vote, I won't take the full 5 minutes. I would like to associate myself with the comments of the chairman of this subcommittee. Political compromising means, keeping your shirt on and still getting something off your chest. And I think that's what we have been able to do, is to work through knotty problems. And we believe that we will reform and HUD will perform. The way in which we have dealt with this legislation, I think, is a style that we need to use to get a lot of things done. Congressman Luke DeMauer and I don't think concurrently, but we do think collaboratively. And I think that that's one of the benefits of us working together on this bill. Now, I do have a few remaining questions on the bill, but I do think that we will be able to work those things out. And I'm grateful for this hearing and the opportunity to move forward on H.R. 3700. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you, gentlemen. It took two men from the Show Me State to show everybody that we can get things done and work together, and we're more than happy to do that. Again, we apologize to our distinguished panel of witnesses today. They schedule votes whenever they so feel it's necessary, and as a result, we have a duty that we're supposed to take care of, which is to go vote and take care of some of the business of the country and of our citizens. So with that, we will recess until such time as the votes are concluded. Thank you. Anything else?
No, sir. We'll see you back when we do witness and
Okay, appreciate your indulgence. Sorry for the interruption, but we're back, and we will try and expedite this as quickly as possible. In doing so, we're going to forego the testimony of everybody. It's all handed out. We've read it already, and we're going to go straight to the questions. So I've got a few comments to make, and then introductions, and then when Mr. Cleaver has an introduction, we'll go right to questions. Okay? Today we welcome the testimony of Ms. Laura Burns, board member, National Leased Housing Association, Ms. Heather Bradley Geary, lead developer for Supportive Housing, the Vincino Group, Ms. Evelyn Craig, president and CEO of Restart Incorporated, Mr. Chris Polakrin, 2015 president, National Association of Realtors, Mr. Stephen Merritt, Norwood Housing Authority, on behalf of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, Mr. Kevin Kelly, 2014 chairman of the board, National Association of Home Builders, Mr. Will Fisher, senior policy analyst, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and Ms. Hillary Schwab-Gallerlo, Director of Federal Policy, Corporation for Supportive Housing. Apologize for misstating any of your names. With a name like Lutkemeyer, that happens to me regularly, and so my apologies. Never seems to bother me, but if it does you, I certainly apologize. Given the large number of witnesses, the ranking member have agreed to waive oral statements from the witnesses, meaning move directly into the questions. Without objection, your written statement will be part of the record. Before turning to questions, I want to extend a special welcome to two Missourians on today's panel. Ms. Heather Bradley Geary has long been an advocate for Missourians in need and has dedicated her career to fighting homelessness and ensuring those in need, particularly children, have supporting housing options they need. Heather, thank you for being here today, and we look forward to your testimony. And now I'll turn to Mr. Cleaver to introduce Ms. Evie Craig, our other witness from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I take great pleasure in introducing Evie Craig from the state's largest city, Kansas City. Ms. Craig, as the chairman mentioned, is the executive director of Restart, Inc., which is an interfaith ministry serving homeless men, women, youth, and families in the urban core of Kansas City. And she's been in this position for 13 years, and I'm very pleased that she's been there for 13 years. We've been able to work together, and she's grown Restart's annual budget from $1.33 million in 2004 to $7.17 million in 2015, which also points out the severity of the issue of homelessness. And she serves on the Jackson County Mental Health Commission, the Executive Committee of the Greater Kansas City Regional Task Force on Homelessness, and is the local chair of the 100,000 Homes campaign to provide housing for vulnerable individuals and families, among her other distinguished accomplishments. Ms. Craig, we're pleased to have you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And with that, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes and begin the questioning. Obviously, all of you seem to be supportive of HR 3700, and thank you for that. We have worked diligently trying and work with all parties to come to an agreement on something that we can all find some support for, and along the way, we thank each of you for your help in getting to where we have gotten with this piece of legislation. We recognize there's more work to be done, and with that, I would like to ask what other things you would like to see in the bill, or any things you'd like to, in particular, point out that are important to you. And let me start with Ms. Burns. Please, let me start for a second here. The system, the microphone system in front of you, just make sure you hit the button that says talk, and then you've got, I've got 5 minutes here, so whenever the thing lights up to yellow, you know my time's about over with, so that means I'm going to be pretty short with my questions, and everybody else will be too, okay?
Thank you, Chairman Lutkemeyer, Ranking Member Cleaver, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Laura Burns, and I'm here on behalf of the National Leased Housing Association. I'm also a national affordable housing developer with 14 properties in Missouri and 2,000 units, so I'm proud to own properties in your great state.
Yeah, that's a great decision, I can tell you.
You know, some of the things that we think are really important in this bill that are really helpful, the steps might seem small to some, but they seem quite material to us. You know, the inspection standards changes that is included in the bill is very important to us. Our company provides services, provides housing through project-based contracts, through housing choice voucher, project voucher contracts, and through tenant vouchers. And some of the changes that are proposed in both the inspection standards, the recertification of fixed income residents being allowed every 3 years, and the increased flexibility to the project-based voucher program will make a big difference. We have a property, for instance, in St. Louis with a housing choice voucher contract, and some of the program changes that are included here would have really made a difference to how efficiently this property operated over the years. We're in year 12 of our contract and have experienced many of the things that this bill looks to address, including delays, significant delays in occupancy as a result of inspections. 30 days is very normal. Sometimes we see as long as 90 days before a new resident can move in. Site-based waiting lists are really important when the list is so long, and the rent increase process of having certainty in how the program is going to work when you marry that with the low-income housing tax credit program, those are really helpful to our industry and to doing future deals.
Thank you. Ms. Bradley Geary?
Thank you. I agree with Ms. Burns. There's a lot of great things in HR 3700, but I want to focus specifically on the FUP vouchers, which has a horrible acronym, so I apologize. It's Family Unification Program. It's vouchers for your young adults that are leaving foster care, and I stand before you with 3 hats. I'm a supportive housing developer that does a lot of development for young people that are aging out of foster care. I am also a foster care parent. Both of my kids are adopted from the foster care system in Missouri, and I'm also a social worker. So, you know, we have 23,000 kids, young adults that leave foster care every year. 1 in 5 of those are going to become homeless if we don't do something to stop that.
What is it? Is there anything that we can do or change, do something different?
I believe-
Improve it? Or what do you, we're taking the first step here. What's the next step we need?
Absolutely. So I believe you've added the language in the bill that we're asking for, and that is to up from 18 to 36 months that the voucher is eligible for the youth. And then also to up the age from 21 to 24 for our youth that are aging out of foster care to be eligible for those vouchers.
What's the reason for jumping the age of 21?
A lot of our kids leave the foster care system and they still need the supports up to age 24. And I'll use myself as an example. I had a safety net as a child that my parents were there when I was making bad decisions. These youth do not have a safety net. And so they're able, if we up the age to 24, we're able to catch a lot of those youth in those 3 years that do not have a safety net. So that allows us to give them that.
How many kids are we talking about here? And that utilize this? How many that you anticipate utilizing? How many kids do you anticipate using these vouchers?
Using the vouchers, in Missouri alone, our estimates come in at about 1,800 kids that are aging out, about 1/5 of those, so that would be 374 youth that would be eligible for those, and that's just Missouri.
This is a very important issue to me because I think that this is an area where we can actually make a difference.
Absolutely.
Very helpful. So I say I'm about timed out. Let me stop here and I'll
Thank you.
call on the, thank you for your testimony. I'll call on the ranking member, Mr. Cleaver, the gentleman from Missouri, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I know many, if not most, if not almost everybody on the panel, and I appreciate all the work that you all have done over the years. But I want to send this question to Ms. Craig and Ms. Garlow. Maybe I'll go with you first, and I know I can see it in your facial expression how much you wish you were still here and sitting up here. You're advocates for foster care youth, and you've championed for changes to help improve housing services for young adults. And Ms. Craig, you were saying in your statement that more than 800 young adults aged out of the foster care system in Jackson County. How has the Family Unification Program in our proposed bill been helpful in addressing the needs of our foster youth?
And I'm sorry, did you want me to answer
Yes,
first,
yes,
Congressman?
please.
And I wanted to say the Royals do play today.
Yes.
By the way.
Oh, my goodness.
So we are up against a very
We need to get out of here.
important, just saying. This happened to me 24 hours ago at City Council testifying before the Mayor's Legislative Committee. So it brought good luck, so we can only hope, right? So sorry. Well, presently, there are lots of barriers to young adults and specifically young adults in foster care, getting access to these housing resources. And transition age is a very, very important time because we're looking at young people who haven't had some normal developmental supports, and developmental growth is critical to successful adulthood. So this opportunity to have stable housing, and I think that one of the provisions that I understand is in now is the opportunity. This may seem like a technicality, but it's huge. In the life of a young adult. The opportunity to get access to a housing voucher 90 days before you are out of the system means, you know, ta-da, this is amazing, that you can get services and housing simultaneously for a 90-day period while you wait on that cusp of being independent. So it's the kind of supports that many people get from their families or extended families that a lot of the young people that we work with don't have. And they do then, as we see, fall not only into homelessness, but don't graduate from high school, are 46 or unemployed by the age of 24. And what really we end up saying to them is, quite frankly, if you wait long enough and you're homeless long enough, we'll get you housing just in time to die. And we need to be able to use our federal housing resources to get young people into housing in order to live their life to its fullest potential. And that's where I really feel very strongly that this bill, it may seem regulatory in nature, I don't know, but I see it as having the capacity to have an amazing impact on the future of our country. Because these young people have that opportunity, but only if they can get some of these resources. And I think what's for all of us, and we've been talking a little bit as we're here, we work in the world, some of us, of the red tape and the regulations, and there are things that that not by intent did anyone mean to put a barrier in front of a young child exiting foster care, but it's there nonetheless because of the inability of agencies to work together or us to be able to provide the resources. So I think the flexibility that's been added into the language around FUP has the possibility to be really simply transformational.
Thank you. Ms. Garbarlo?
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to kind of echo what Evelyn was saying, but I also think I agree that aligning the transition plans that youth have when they're aging out of foster care, they're supposed to have a transition plan for 90 days prior to when they leave care, and this would align the resources with the plans that they have and make sure that the voucher can be built into the plan so they are not having a lapse in housing. The other thing I think that's really important is the guidance between HUD and HHS and having them work together to help housing authorities work with their local child welfare agencies to improve referral processes, to improve access to supportive services for the young adults that are receiving these vouchers. So I do think the changes contemplated are really important, and I think that they will provide that housing stability and right away, as opposed to what Evelyn was saying, is when young adults fall into homelessness after leaving care, and then they come back into stable housing situations.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. We are looking to put that in the bill. We thank you for that suggestion, and we also are looking to add my crack staff that keeps talking in my both ears at the same time. So unfortunately, I can only hear out of one at a time, but we are looking to do that as well. So we thank you for those suggestions and keep them coming. With that, we go to the gentleman from Texas. Mr. Williams is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also thank you to the witnesses today for being here. Appreciate seeing you. The Section 8 housing voucher concept could be one of the most successful public-private initiatives, but as with many other government programs, it has started to sag under the weight of too many burdensome and duplicative requirements. The Housing Modernization Act will make important changes that will improve the program for all stakeholders. My question would be to you, Mr. Merritt. What do you think are the most critical problems facing the assisted housing portfolio, and how will the proposed legislation, how will it make improvements?
Thank you. I just want to speak that this is a great bill for us, and it's a start to fix some of those problems that you bring up, Mr. Congressman. A couple of things. Increasing the percentage of the limitation on the voucher program for project-based vouching would be critically important to us to help populations that are underserved now people such as persons with intellectual disabilities, which I've done a project in my hometown on. There's a whole population out there of young people aging up over 22 that are in need of housing with supportive services. And the project-based voucher extension would allow us to serve more of those individuals who will need help for a long time. It also, the idea of triannual rent redeterminations will take away some of the administrative burden that we would have having to renew rents every year for people who are on fixed incomes, where the rent doesn't change. We're doing recertifications for rent that might change $2 to $3 either way. And that's really a waste of a lot of time and effort that could be used for other more productive issues. The other is the fair market rent issue is becoming a problem, and by allowing us to raise the percentage of fair market rent that we're able to up to 120% would be very important, particularly in high-income areas, high rental areas like where I am in the Boston area.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kelly, steps have already been taken to eliminate duplicative inspections through the budget process for assisted housing funded with multiple subsidies, and H.R. 3700 further streamlines the effort by permitting immediate tenant occupancy if the unit has been inspected under a federal housing program with the same stringent standards. Would you help us understand the financing challenges associated with affordable housing? And does this mean that in order for affordable housing to exist and/or be developed, an owner must find multiple sources of capital to develop these properties?
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. I am representing the National Association of Home Builders, but I am a builder-developer, own and operate some 5,000 plus units of affordable housing, and have developed over 11,000 units. Securing financing for affordable housing is an extraordinary challenge and becoming ever so each and every day. I use both Section 8 project-based assistance. The vouchers are critically important in the development of new properties, primarily the low-income housing tax credit, where state housing finance agencies or communities decide that to target lower-income families below 50% of median income. So those vouchers make it critically important in order to secure the financing. Those transactions also have a multiple number of financing sources besides the debt, the tax credits, often funds from the federal home loan banks or home funding. But again, often if the targeting is such to very low income families, the vouchers are critically important in order to make the transaction feasible.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield my time back.
The gentleman yields his time back. With that, we go to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And may I please take a moment of my time to thank you and the ranking member for working together on this piece of legislation. I think it's exceedingly important, Mr. Chairman, and it has bipartisan support. This is one of those times when I think we can say that we're working together for the good of our country, and I appreciate you very much. And I thank you also, Mr. Ranking Member. You have been a real friend to those who are in need of housing in this country, and I appreciate both of you. Mr. Chairman, if I may say this, I also would like to speak on behalf of 420 members of Congress. That's the number that voted for the Homes for Hero Act in the 113th Congress. And I'm proud that you have made Section 403 of this legislation, you've dedicated it to the Homes for Heroes legislation. The Homes for Heroes legislation would place a person in HUD whose job it is to look out for veterans. This person would help us to prevent persons from becoming homeless, veterans and their families, and also to provide some relief for those who may be homeless. We believe that those who are willing to risk their lives for this country merit the very best that we can offer. And I think that we can do more. I think this legislation will help us to help our veterans who are in poverty, homeless, and those who may be falling into poverty and homelessness. I would also mention to you, Mr. Chairman, that I am concerned about people who are waiting in line for housing. Most of the housing authorities across this country have persons who are standing in very long lines to get help. And as you know, we have, as of late, seen news stories about persons who are over income, and still receiving a housing subsidy, as it were. Perhaps they're paying the max that they can be required to pay, 80% of the AMI, but they're still over income. Some of them are over income by a wide margin. My concern is this. We have people who are standing in line who need this housing. Many have been in line for years, literally, not figuratively, for years. And we have persons who are over income who are in public housing. The public perception is that as you move up, you move out. You move up, your income is better, and you move out. I'm appreciative that you are attempting to address this issue in this piece of legislation. We cannot allow the perception to be that this benefit is for the greedy as well as the needy. It's not for the greedy. It's for needy people. And those who are standing in line are of concern to me. I want to make sure that they have the opportunity to benefit from good, decent housing, just as the people who are there currently are. And there's much more that we can do. I'm not a person who believes that we've done all we can do, but I am a person who believes that we have to give some thought to those who are in line, those who need this housing. So I'm appreciative that the legislation addresses this. There may be some tweaking to it. I'm amenable to working with you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, but this is something that I think is of paramount importance. And finally, if I may say this as I close, across the length and breadth of our country, there are people who are working hard to help those who are homeless. People do a good job every day. And now I'm talking about the housing authorities. I find that too often they take heat for things that they are trying at their best to do properly and to do correctly. And I just want to say to them, please, continue to do the good work that you're doing. The criticism that you get is something that sort of comes with the job, but there are just so many that are doing a good job. Public servants all working hard for the persons who are in need of housing. With that said, Mr. Chairman, I thank you again, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. We go to next gentleman from New Mexico. Mr. Pierce is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I find myself agreeing with Democrats frequently on many things, but now I'm in the awkward position of finding myself agreeing with a Texan on some things. So would agree with the gentleman as he said, thanks to our ranking member and to our chairman for the work that they've done. We began this sort of reform work, I guess you would call it, with Native American housing about 3 years ago. So one of the things that we found is that, that the reforms were fought by HUD more than anybody else. Is that something that you would sort of ring true? I just do a head shake because I've got a couple more questions. Just head shakes up and down, or no, yes, no, yeah. So yeah, the agency is resistant to anything that makes the system work better. And we're not going to overcome that unless you all start calling your members of Congress to go in and sit with them. Through lengthy processes, HUD actually began to see what we were doing as not a threat, but as a benefit. But I suspect we're going to have to do the same thing here. And so as you bump up against those physical stops, those emotional stops inside the agency, just consider it worthwhile to get one of us to sit down. You come in, and I think anybody on either side of the aisle, anybody on the committee, would be happy to sit and reason through with HUD the reasons for doing these. So again, appreciate all of your passions here working in your particular areas. My question for Mr. Kelly has to do with rural housing, obviously. New Mexico is a very rural state. 50% of the housing in my district is in manufactured housing, so we're always struggling to improve the lot. But what are the biggest challenges that are being faced for rural housing right now? Your testimony has things about that, so.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I am a developer and owner of 515 rural housing developments. I own approximately 18 developments. I've acquired those under the the RD demonstration program. This bill talks about making that permanent. I think that is would be an extraordinary positive step forward. It is an enormous challenge. There is a inventory of housing out there that the country and private owners have invested in that has the ability to be preserved and maintained for decades to come with utilizing the right programs. It is a challenge. The incomes often in rural areas are depressed, but nonetheless, there is, I think, that program has demonstrated that it can be done, and it certainly should be done to meet those crying needs, because you rarely find the private lending institutions, or for that matter, FHA, providing assistance in those areas.
Does the 515 need to be expanded, or can the agency do that by itself? Does this legislation need expansion, or?
I believe the program should be expanded because of the size of the
Can it be
portfolio.
done by the agency, or does it need to be done in legislation, in your opinion? You would have much more experience than most of us on the committee, so.
I would say probably legislatively.
Okay. Ms. Craig, you have a passion there for helping people that need help, and then you've heard, again, the gentleman from Texas talk about moving up, moving out. How big a problem is this prioritization of need? In other words, do people languish in the housing that should be out and on their own?
Well, I can't speak to it in general overall in terms of individuals who are in housing authorities, but I certainly will say that I think anything that clarifies and simplifies and provides more options for getting people off the waiting list. Housing authorities have preferences, but because there's such a backlog, that ends up not having an impact on the waiting list, which is frustrating to everybody. And when we went through sequestration, we were finding that in Kansas City, an 8-year-old child previously might be waiting 4 years to get into public housing. With sequestration, that same kid might be waiting 12 years until he would have his own
Let me grab a
family.
couple more. I've only got 23 seconds.
Sorry.
Ms. Garlow, would you happen to have an opinion, or Ms. Burns? Either one of y'all have an opinion about this moving up and moving out? How bad is the problem, and how much could we improve it?
Yeah, so one thing that I think that could help to help people who are in assisted housing, or families and households that are in assisted housing, is looking at the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, which is an asset building and financial capacity program that resides in HUD, and PHAs administer this program, and to better connect families to that program, and families that are maybe higher in need. So maybe connecting the HUD-VASH recipients with it. You can connect families that are receiving the FUP voucher, in particular youth that are receiving the FUP voucher. This might be a great tool to help them as an additional service to increase their access to programs and services to lead to independence later on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Next in line is the gentleman from Minnesota. Mr. Ellison, recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to thank the chairman and the ranking member for putting this bill to improve how we provide affordable housing, affordable rental housing to extremely low-income families to help home buyers purchase a condo. This is great. I appreciate it. And the goal of today's hearing is to examine how the federal government can better provide housing assistance in the 21st century. In light of the fact that incomes remain too low for many workers to afford market rate housing, we need to invest more federal funds to address the rental housing crisis. While I support many provisions in the bill considered today, the real answer is to in my opinion, quadruple our investments in rental housing for extremely low-income families. I've asked for Chart 1 to be shown on the screen. Mr. Fisher, this chart is from the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. Can you explain what it says about our rental housing crisis?
Sure. And I'll say first, I think it's really important to move forward with the targeted changes in this bill, which I think are well-designed and would deliver real benefits to low-income people. But it's true that the challenges go well beyond what this bill can address. This chart shows the blue line there is the number of families with what HUD calls worst-case housing needs, which means they're very low-income families who pay more than half of their income for housing or live in severely substandard housing, and that's gone way up. It's up more than 30% since before the recession. The red line is the number of families with rental assistance, which has pretty much been stagnant. So this shows that the number of families struggling to afford housing has gone way up, but the programs that are best positioned to address that need have pretty much been treading water.
Thanks a lot. I'd like to point out that nationwide we have more than 1.3 million homeless children. In my own district, city of Minneapolis, which is a pretty well-to-do town, we got about 4,000 kids every day going to school from a shelter. Anyway, Mr. Fisher, let me show you chart 2. We spent more than $270 billion a year on housing, $270 billion in housing in America. But this chart shows that the bulk of the investment, was for better off families. Can you explain the financial benefits families receive and who receives the most generous housing assistance? Because some people would have us believe that it's the very poor who get all the housing assistance. Is that right?
When you include tax expenditures along with direct rental subsidies, the bulk, close to 3/4 of federal housing expenditures go towards home ownership, and the biggest share of that is for deductions like the property tax deduction, especially the mortgage interest deduction that go predominantly to higher income families. And that's what this chart here shows. About 3/4 of the benefits from those deductions go to families with incomes above $100,000, and more than a third go to families with incomes above $200,000.
Okay, so this is 3. And when we think of who receives housing benefits, we don't realize that high-income families receive 4 times more housing benefits than do low-income families. You know, what should we do to right-size housing assistance? And I know you're familiar with my bill, the Common Sense Housing Investment Act. I'd welcome your reflections on it and your reflections on this chart.
I think it's what this chart shows is cause for concern. I mean, low-income people are much more likely than higher-income people to deal with problems like eviction and homelessness, which are bad for everyone, but especially bad for children, as you mentioned. And part of what drives that is that federal housing resources are targeted heavily on higher-income families who could afford housing without help. I think that the issues that your bill raises, like looking at reforms to the mortgage interest deduction that would keep a large mortgage interest benefit in place, but reduce it some for higher income households and expand it for middle income folks and generate some savings that could be used for other things, I think is a sensible approach.
Thanks a lot. Looks like I'm running out of time. Let me see if I can ask Mr. Polycron a question. Mr. Polycron, thank you for being here today. Allow me to ask you about marketing services agreements and control business arrangements. I read the Realtor's recent report, Definitive Analysis of Negative Game Changers Emerging in Real Estate. It's called the Danger Report. It warns that many realtors are most likely in violation of TILA-RESPA rules regarding illegal kickbacks. When the title insurance agency is referred business through an affiliated business arrangement, where does the cost of the referral get absorbed? Who pays for it?
Well, the danger report, as you may, and thank you for the question, sir, but the danger report was something for us to look forward that might happen. It isn't something that's actually happening. It's something that we're trying to prevent from happening. And marketing service agreements are certainly something that not only the DOJ looks at a lot, but we have to be careful on how those are initiated. I can tell you that our association is constantly monitoring that to make sure that when we do any type of marketing service, that it's done properly.
Thank you, and I yield back the time that I don't have.
Gentleman's time he is correct. It has expired. With that, we go to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss. He's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the panel for being with us this afternoon. I'd like to address this first question to Mr. Kelly. In your written testimony, you note that it currently costs an apartment owner more to rent to a voucher holder than it does to rent to an unsubsidized resident. One of the reasons for this cost discrepancy is the program's burdensome and often duplicative inspections standards. Can you discuss some of the disincentives for renting to voucher holders?
Sure. Well, the inspection process itself is one, certainly, sir. The uncertainty for a landowner or an apartment owner when a tenant, prospective tenant, approaches them with their certificate or a voucher and explains that their property has to be inspected by a public housing agency. They have to wait for that. The owner can't enter into the agreement at that point in time. It is subject to the inspection process. And as I think has been indicated in some of the written testimony, those inspections can fail for such innocuous things as a torn screen. And those are the kinds of things that you don't keep secret in the private rental market. Owners know about it. They talk about it. So that's an example of the kinds of disincentives that are out there in the current administration of the program that dissuade private property owners from participating in the program.
By consolidating inspection standards, is there any risk for increased fraud and abuse, which would potentially place residents in unsafe housing?
I assume that there may be, but I think, quite frankly, there is a expeditious process to follow up on the heels of that tenant being approved to live in that resident, and with an owner understanding that, if in fact he has defrauded somebody, that'll be caught relatively quickly. So I think it's extremely de minimis.
Mr. Merritt, my district is home to many seniors living on fixed incomes, and some of these individuals receive housing assistance. As you know, H.R. 3700 permits income recertification for people living on fixed incomes every 3 years as opposed to yearly. Clearly, this reform reduces burdens on residents by avoiding what can be a stressful and difficult yearly process. Can you comment on how this might impact housing providers and administrators?
I'm sorry, how it would protect, sir?
How the moving from every 3 years on income certification to, annual to every 3 years. Can you comment on how this might impact housing providers and administrators?
Thank you for the question. The impact would be pretty immediate as to the decline, lower the workload for individuals in offices around the country. The caseload would go down, which allows us to spend some time on other things that we've had to take time away from. And I would agree with you that the process of rent certification can be very stressful, particularly for seniors on an annual basis. I would also say they're also some of the most prepared when they do come into our office, and it can be very easy. So the time frame to do a senior residence rent calculation can be 5 to 10 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on what their capabilities are and the medical deductions that are allowed and things. So it is a burdensome administrative activity that would be reduced to every 3 years, and it wouldn't be. I would assume not every resident would come in on the same year. We would stagger it, so it would reduce the monthly workload, which frees up time that is actually not there anymore.
Thank you. And I'm wondering if maybe any panelists would want to comment on this. Section 109 of H.R. 3700 creates flexibility of capital and operating fund amounts by allowing housing authorities in good standing to blend up to 20% of their federally appropriated capital and operating funds. Does this create an incentive for public housing authorities to modernize their systems and operations so they can have greater flexibility and control moving forward?
I would answer that in the absolutely affirmatively. Yes, it would help us to incentivize improving our systems. It allows us that flexibility to spend that money either on a property issue that we're dealing with and maybe short-funded, or administratively in helping our offices maintain computer systems and things like that that come up every so often. So that would go both ways, that fungibility. It's an important tool to help complete capital projects that may need that little bit of extra cash that aren't available through the capital program.
Thank the Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Next up is another gentleman from Missouri, the distinguished Mr. Clay. He's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Cleaver, also for conducting this hearing. Let me ask Mr. Polycron about HUD's 223F program. There's been a precipitous drop in the program, and it is because HUD changed the underwriting requirements 2 years ago. What has been the impact of HUD's underwriting changes to its multifamily program?
With your permission, I'm going to defer that to Ms. Burns. I don't do rentals. I'm being honest with you. It's you either do rentals when you're a realtor or you don't, and I'm going to defer to Ms. Burns with your permission.
Ms. Burns, could you
Sure.
talk to me about what has been the impact on the program?
Well, it's hard to know specifically what could cause that drop, but we do know how complicated it is to put together a transaction and to make all of the pieces work in an affordable housing transaction. Every piece of the underwriting matters, and what we understand is that the movement to a longer-term view of replacement reserve needs has created a more difficult program to underwrite, and that our understanding is that the change could be made back to a 10 or even a 12-year replacement reserve window, and that would make it more affordable for the developer to put that property together and to be successful in that transaction.
So it is really the rule change has dampened the ability to develop those properties.
It requires a much larger investment in the front end, which means that you don't have enough money to afford to do something else that may be more important.
Thank you for that response. Let me go to Mr. Kelly with the home builders. Are you familiar with the 223F program? And
I am, sir, and I've done a number of developments utilizing the program. But as Ms. Burns said, and I've done them typically in conjunction with repositioning a property, utilizing also the low-income housing tax credits. The challenge we face is when those reserves are required up front, additional capital reserves up front, it simply leaves often inadequate resources to rehabilitate the project to meet not only sort of my standards, because I know I'm going to be holding on to it for a long time, the investor standards, and also in many instances to meet local code requirements that continue to raise the cost of housing, while well-intended, often outstrip the ability of particularly of affordable housing developments to meet, and therefore render the development infeasible.
Mr. Kelly, in the best of all worlds, what would be a reasonable modification of this rule? If you had it your way and could go into HUD and direct them to change this rule, what would be a reasonable modification of the rule?
Well, again, a reasonable amount of reserve for replacement up front, but also earned over time as was traditionally done, put into the reserves over time, because it is that large upfront cash investment that renders the project infeasible. Obviously, every project is slightly different, and depending on its physical condition, its market That amount may vary, but there ought to be greater flexibility depending on the particular circumstances, and that doesn't exist at the moment.
And it's really dampened the ability to provide affordable housing to larger amounts of the population. Is
It
that
does,
correct?
sir.
Thank you so much for your responses. And Mr. Chairman, I have no other inquiries, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Next, we go to the gentleman from Kentucky. Mr. Barr is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for your leadership in introducing H.R. 3700. And to our witnesses, I want to first address the issue of continuum of care grants in combating homelessness. And I think I'll direct my question to Ms. Bradley Geary and Ms. Craig on this one, and anybody else who might want to jump in on this. As I understand it, the continuum of care program provides that if a grant is not fully expended in 24 months, the money is recaptured by HUD unless the Secretary reallocates it to another entity serving in the same geographic area. We've had a problem with this in Kentucky, my home state of Kentucky, where two metropolitan areas, Lexington in my congressional district and Louisville, are receiving continuum of care dollars, but in Lexington in my congressional district, that money goes out the door pretty quickly, and we exhaust that funding. But we've had a situation where Louisville has had a surplus of funds, and instead of allowing a reallocation of those dollars to Lexington, which has a significant homelessness need, the department recaptures that. H.R. 3700 does attempt to address that issue, fortunately, by clarifying geographic area. And my question to you all is, do you think facilitating the convertibility of unspent funds, unspent grant monies between qualifying grantees would increase access to fighting homelessness?
I can address that, and yes, I do. The short answer is yes. I think as long as we leave that up to the continuum of care in the areas that you're serving. So the continuum of care, right, is the plan to end homelessness, and those are your boots on the ground in those communities. And so as long as there's input from that community about how those funds should be spent, yes, I think that would be in the best interest of the people we're serving.
Our state office has said that even though you have unspent funds in one city 1 hour away from another city in need, that Washington HUD wouldn't allow for the convertibility. And it just seems like a little bit of a bureaucracy getting in the way of delivering the dollars where they need to go. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. To Mr. Merritt, I want to talk about moving to work. The Lexington Housing Authority, my district, is a moving to work jurisdiction, and it's been very successful in terms of the fungibility of dollars. But I want to address work requirements and time limits. My colleague and friend from Texas, Mr. Green, on the other side of the aisle, talked about the need for us to focus on these waiting lists, and I couldn't agree more. We need to not only focus on the beneficiaries of Section 8 vouchers and trying to help them achieve self-sufficiency, but the many people who are waiting in line, and this is an oversubscribed program, these Section 8 vouchers. I would want to see Section 8 modernized to the point where we could encourage work, encourage self-sufficiency, so that those who are deserving and waiting in line can get their opportunity at Section 8 housing. And so my question to you is, the President has proposed in the past, President Obama has proposed expanding Move to Work. Move to Work has worked in my congressional district, that flexibility to encourage work requirements and time limits. My question to you is, do you think that would be a good idea to maybe apply time limits and work requirements to Section 8 nationwide?
I think the Moving to Work program is a great program for public housing authorities, and I know the director in your home district, Austin Stims, has done a great job at his authority. To apply them nationwide is a little bit dangerous, because the Moving to Work program allows local housing authority to deal with those issues locally, and that's what's really more important. And it needs to be addressed and is a valuable tool, but it needs to be done on the local level, because what may work in Kentucky may not work in Massachusetts.
Well, if I could just jump in, I agree with you, and Austin has done a great job, and I agree with that local flexibility. But generally speaking, I think what we did in 1996 in this country with welfare reform is we recognized that work is a blessing. Work is not a punishment. Work is a blessing. Work is an opportunity for people to achieve self-esteem and a sense of value. And I think that it's not a local issue. I think it's a universal issue, work. Work providing able-bodied people who receive taxpayer benefits in the form of a Section 8 voucher to encourage work as an incentive of receiving this benefit is a way to get people the help that they need and then out of the system and then open up those vacancies to all those people who are in waiting lines and again, achieve that self-sufficiency.
And I agree with you. And the Family Self-Sufficiency Program is one that we run in my office as well, and it's helped many people on that track to work through educational opportunities. We've had several young women turn into nurses or licensed practical nurses and be able to move off the program. And at the same time that even before they move off, the subsidy level for that voucher goes down. So it's because they're working more, they're paying more. So it is a valuable tool, and there should be a way to incentivize that and help that system along. But the Family Self-Sufficiency Program is working out there in many jurisdictions. It's working very well.
Thank you. My time has expired. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Next we have the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Beatty, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member, and thank you to all of the witnesses here today. First, let me start, Mr. Chairman, in echoing what some of my colleagues have already said, but I think because of the tone of today's hearing, it's worth repeating that it is a good day and a good feeling when we can have a bill that we can find so much good and bipartisan in and meet the standards of why we're here in creating housing opportunities. As someone who has spent a lot of time working in the housing areas, working with public housing, I commend all of you for the roles that you play in helping to create and sustain these opportunities that gets us to that self-sufficiency. With that, before I go to my question, let me also say what we're doing for those young foster care individuals. Recently, I had a number of them who appeared to be somewhat atypical that ended up in my office. They were all college students who had been homeless, but found a way through some advocacy group or individual to get all their paperwork done and get into college. Well, at the first face value, you think, how wonderful. Here's a person that's going to college and great. And as the one gentleman looked at me and said, everything was fine for the first 45 days of school. And then we read the notice that said people are going home for the holiday. And I didn't have a home to go to. And you know, that just hit me right in the face. And I'm thinking, well, here you're at one of the largest institutions in the country, and you're matriculating and doing well. He said, but I ran out of couch surfing. And that was the first time I had heard that term. And so he said, I'm asking you as an advocate and a member of this committee to make sure that any opportunities you get to help us have some of the same privileges that we do for veterans or pregnant teenagers, because we are the future and we're doing well. So I thank everybody here for pushing with that. With that said, since I'm on a roll, I should also say to you, Mr. Chairman, that I think that this bill contains a lot of stuff that I like and that I would be willing to put my signature on. So I want us to note that today. But also, earlier this month, I joined 51 of my colleagues in sending a bipartisan letter to the HUD Secretary Castro asking for changes to the process of financing condominiums and to ease other requirements like owner occupancy and delinquent condo association dues, because I've heard from a lot of my stakeholders that such requirements and restrictions have made the FHA certification process daunting at times, and especially for some of the smaller properties and those that don't have the elite management contracts or people to operate at. I think I read somewhere last week that the Federal Housing Administration is expected to issue rules by the end of the year that could make it easier for lenders to finance loans for condominiums, sales with government backing. So maybe, Mr. Polychron, can you you stated in your testimony that FHA has a number of significant restrictions that prohibit many buyers from purchasing a condo, despite condominiums often represent the most affordable options for first-time home buyers. This is important to me because I'm seeing so many people in my district in condos.
Yes, Congresswoman, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on a subject that I do know something about.
I thought you'd like that question.
Seriously, I live in a small community of Hot Springs, Arkansas, and it says that we have in the whole state of Arkansas 54 condominium developments certified. Now, I know in my own hometown we have homeowners associations or POAs in excess of that number, but because of the certification process, which is 95 pages long, and sometimes not only burdensome to finish or daunting, as you said, but expensive to hire to get a certified financial statement done by a CPA, for instance. The 35% rule, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting that in 3700. The 35% rule is a great start. We'd like to see it at 0 as far as occupancy. The last time we asked for a reduction, the HUD reduced it, or FHA, from 51 to 50. We hope we do better this time with your 35% suggestion. Condominiums are the lowest of the seriously delinquent rates of any of the FHA-insured mortgages. They're 4.9%. The average is 6.96%. So we certainly think that they deserve merit in relaxing the requirements for condominium financing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlelady. With that, we go to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross. He's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I wish to add my name to the list of those that have thanked you and the ranking member for bringing this bill forward. I particularly like certain incentives in there, incentives that give charitable organizations and nonprofits opportunities to invest in energy and water conservation in the remodification and building of housing. I think that's very, very important. I particularly like what my colleague from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, discussed with the Move to Work programs. Those are great incentives. I mean, I think it's important that a lot of this is temporary, but it's become multi-generational, and we need to do all we can to make sure that we provide incentives not only for good housing, but also for the opportunities to gain dignity through work. Section 103 of this particular bill has an interest of me, and it has to do more with the modified means testing in terms of those that stay in the homes and whether they are overqualified financially to be in there. For example, my colleague from Florida, Representative Jolly, and I have been focused on reducing waste and fraud within HUD and to ensure those that rightfully are in need of assistance are able to receive it. A recent HUD Independent Inspector General's report revealed that over 25,000 families currently in taxpayer-supported housing exceeded the maximum allowable income threshold to qualify for federally subsidized housing. For one instance, a New York family with an income of nearly $500,000 is paying $1,574 a month to live in a taxpayer-subsidized public housing. In another unfathomable incident, a family had personal assets of over $1 million while living off the backs of taxpayers. With an ever-growing wait list for housing assistance for those truly in need, these incidences of waste, fraud, and abuse should be eliminated. Therefore, my first question is to Mrs. Burns. What is your perspective regarding tenants who remain in public housing but have the financial means to afford non-subsidized housing, thus opening up an opportunity for those who should be in line for that type of assistance?
My expertise is in privately owned housing, not public housing, but I can respond this way. I think it's incredibly important to catch fraud and abuse. Just this morning, National East Housing Association, myself and our executive director were meeting with HUD to talk about the EIV program,
right,
and the way that program is working. We believe strongly that it is essential to catch fraud and to put teeth in when we catch residents that have misled us on their income and miscertified, that there be teeth rather than just a slap on the wrist and say, please pay us back when you can.
So would you support that Section 103, that after 2 years, that if their income is in excess of 120% of area median income, to charge the tenant the fair market value for the housing?
it seems to make sense to me. As I said, I'm not a public housing person.
No, I agree with you. Moving on, I have a good friend of mine that from Florida who now lives in Atlanta, Georgia, who's head of a nonprofit organization called Impact. I don't know if any of you all have heard that, but the Impact Group provides housing for homeless veterans, amongst others. But they have a tremendous program that incentivizes the private sector to invest, and then they'll assist not only in temporary housing, but finding employment, taking part of their wages to invest in a deposit that eventually they move on to work. The company's in Gwinnett County, Georgia, and they're searching for more ways for private sector participation rather than depending on the federal government. And I'll tell you, I think what's happened over this last few years in housing, being able to leverage private investment to create greater housing with certain guarantees of Section 8 housing and other vouchers has been a great program in order to manage and maximize the amount of housing we have out there. Since it was established in 1992, the Impact Group has grown such that over 90% of the families that graduate their program remain independent of assistance a year later. My question, Mr. Merritt, to you and to anyone else is, given our tight federal budget environment, I mean, let's face it, we got competing interests for federal dollars. How can local and state housing agencies leverage their assets better and find other financial tools to incentivize the private sector to invest in these types of programs?
Being an administrator of a public housing agency, we look at that sort of through the eyes of the HUD regulations, and I know the rental assistance demonstration is something that's underway and is a way to bring in private money into the public housing system. But it also needs the public investment as well, because it's been invested in for a long time, and there is investment there that needs to be protected. So the capital fund program to keep things in repair is important to local public housing agencies.
And furthering tax incentives, furthering tax incentives for the private sector to invest should be good as well, shouldn't it?
It should. Through the low-income housing tax credit system is also very important.
Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Thank you.
All done ready? Fantastic. Apologize. The gentleman yields back. With that, we go to the gentleman from Delaware, Mr. Carney. He's not a member of the committee, but he's got a lot of great questions today, and we look forward to his insights and the information he's going to glean for us. Mr. Carney, recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your kind remarks. Actually, I'm here mainly to welcome to the Capitol one of my constituents, Kevin Kelly. Kevin and I have worked together over the years. He's a Delawarean. He's here as the chairman of the NAHB and a real leader nationally, but he's been developing and working on housing projects for a long, long time in Delaware, a protege of one of the giants in affordable housing in our country, Leon Wiener. Welcome, Kevin. It's great to have you and your expertise here. But since I have a couple minutes, I might ask a few questions. I had to pinch myself for a minute because there was so much agreement across the aisle here. I guess it's not surprising, frankly, given who the chairman and the ranking member of this committee are. Two people who are always looking to work together, and the comedy that you bring to this committee is extraordinary. There's been a lot of discussion. What's interesting is we have common problems, among our districts, and many center around the lack of adequate resources and scarce resources. And I wonder start with you, Mr. Kelly, if you could tell us how we could more efficiently use the federal resources that are available, and I'll ask Mr. Fisher and Mr. Merritt as well that question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Carney, for the kind words, and it has been a pleasure working with you over the years. I certainly applaud the initiative of the committee in this particular bill. We're competing in a world of very scarce resources. I think what HR 3700 does is look at substance and results over process. And too many of our programs are burdened by process and not results. And I think this bill attempts to address many of those issues.
I know there's some controversy over the Moving to Work program, but it is, and folks have indicated that it works differently in different places. It has worked well in Delaware, and it's I don't know, it's not the be-all and end-all, but it seems to me it ought to be a piece to the point, Mr. Kelly, you're mentioning in terms of effectiveness.
I would agree. In looking at my privately owned Section 8 family portfolio, we run somewhere between 70 and 75% of the families in our developments are working at any one time. These families are often underemployed, face challenges in employment, but on average, our developments run, again, they're Section 8. These are people at or below 50% of median income, but the vast majority of them are working, and that's a benefit, certainly.
And I have the same problem, frankly, that I've heard from my colleagues on both sides of the aisle with respect to Section 8 waiting lists. They're just way too long. I go to a training session for mostly young women who are on TANF, and one of their big complaints is they can't get any housing assistance because they can't get a Section 8 voucher because folks aren't moving off of it. I guess part of it is we don't have enough of them, but it makes it extremely difficult for people who are moving up. We're trying to help and give a hand up to get that kind of assistance that they need.
Excuse me, sir, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I will tell you with our project-based elderly developments, the waiting list is approximately 5 years. From Chelton Apartments down at Wilton Route 40 to Main Towers in Newark, those waiting lists run about 5 years. They're closed at the moment. Our family developments are probably 2 to 3 years at a minimum. Obviously, for families in dire needs, that's an impossible.
Mr. Fisher, any solutions?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the point you just raised about moving people, helping people to move off of housing assistance and helping them move towards self-sufficiency, I think one way to do that, and that could be readily added to this bill that we're discussing today, would be improvements to the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. Senators Reid and Senators Blunt in the Senate have a good bill to do that. And it's got bipartisan support in House bills as well in the past. You mentioned the moving to work demonstration. I think you're right that it's a highly controversial issue and one that has played out differently in different places. It's resulted in some useful innovation, but it's also had harmful effects like transfers of voucher funds that have resulted in fewer families getting assistance and big increases in rents for the lowest income families. So I think if there is an expansion of that, it would be really important to make really fundamental reforms that would address some of those concerns. I know Ms. Waters has a proposal that would take steps in that direction.
Thank you very much. Just with the 5 seconds, we're also experiencing an issue with the continuum of care where the priority is being put into rapid rehousing, and it's very negatively affected transitional programs, which are really, really important. Mr. Chairman, thanks so much for allowing me some time today.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, gentleman, for his questions. Mr. Sherman, you are the last individual to go through the round number 1 here. Are you ready to ask questions? If so, you'll be recognized, or we can wait if you're not quite ready.
Indeed.
A gentleman like you, you're used to popping stuff right off the top of your head, so I don't think it'd be a problem for you, but I want to give you the time in case you do need that.
Let me first ask the representative from the home builders. I believe that's Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Sherman, be recognized for 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Kelly, I've noticed in your testimony that you've discussed the floodplain management executive order and your concerns about how this would affect the cost and also the timeline of building new multifamily units. I particularly want to see multifamily units because the environmental footprint is so much less. The ability to then support rapid transit systems is there. I happen to live in a single-family detached house in my district, but I'm an advocate for multifamily housing. Can you explain how this executive order will affect the timeline and the cost?
Well, to be honest with you, we don't know. What we know is it creates enormous uncertainty. We've gone essentially from what has been the rule for decades of the 100-year floodplain to essentially what is a 500-year floodplain. In addition, various agencies are given various discretions in evaluating a project to meet the provisions of this executive order. So I, as a developer now, have no idea whether or not a piece of land that I may be examining to use, whether it's urban and suburban or rural areas, would come under the restrictions of this executive order, given its proximity to a body of water. Because at the moment, nobody does 500-year floodplains. Could I get an engineer to do it at some point in time? Yes. Then I take that information to HUD. There's no standards in which for the HUD field office to evaluate my request to build in that area. And so as a developer, question is, why would I want to pursue it in the first place? And secondly, if I was crazy enough to do so, the question then becomes is, when, if ever, I'll get an approval out of a HUD field office to make that determination.
That certainly has got to discourage the construction. I'd point out that while I usually fight for my district, that was a non-parochial question, because I represent a city built in a desert during a drought. So that one was for the rest of the country. But Mr. Polychron, continuing my focus on multifamily housing, we've got condos. It's a good way for people to first get their first home, first-time home buyers. 3700 has some provisions designed to facilitate condo sales, and those include allowing mixed-use space, streamlining the recertification of condo projects, and changing the owner occupancy requirements. How's that going to let people buy multifamily housing, and how's it going to affect people who've never owned a home and want to own one?
Congressman Sherman, thank you for the question. I kind of answered the first two right before you got here. So if you would let me, I'd like to go into the 25% commercial rule, which certainly is in 3700, and thank you for that, sir, because if you think about, especially in urban areas, where you have a beautiful, let's just call it a 200-unit building, and all of a sudden you want to have commercial on the ground floor and maybe office space in the next 2 or 3 floors. If you have the 25% cap, you cannot do that building. So we certainly think this is a tremendous opportunity to expand housing for condominiums in that manner. The private transfer fees are something else that have prohibited additional opportunities in condominium financing. First, you should know that NAR is opposed to any equity stripping type private transfer that might exist. We've always opposed that.
And I've joined you in that often.
Certainly, but
several here.
But if that transfer fee benefits or improves that development or that project, we certainly think it ought to be, as in FHFA, be allowed to be part of the process. So thank you for that opportunity.
We've seen a number of these live, work, shop developments, mixed use. They make a lot of sense. It's the only chance somebody will have to cut their commuting time and their commuting environmental footprint. You could sometimes, if you're lucky, commute to work on the elevator. So I think it makes sense for us to modernize these rules and allow the mixed-use buildings. You have one last comment?
Well, if you allow me, sir, the town center concept is what HUD has been promoting, and yet we restrict it by making the 25% rule. So hopefully we'll get this passed, and certainly you'll have our help.
I want to commend the author of 3700. I know there's some provisions on Section 8 that will still be worked out, and I look forward to working to get this bill on the floor of the House. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and his time has expired. I'm going to do a quick second round of questions here, and I'll begin with myself, and a follow-up, Mr. Polychron, with you with regards to condos and home ownership. I had a conversation last week with a housing authority owner in England, and they have a little bit different problem there. They've got almost, I think, he used a figure of 15 to 17% public housing. And they're trying to, over the last number of years, shift a lot of that public housing to the private sector. In other words, allow people who are in their homes to find a way to own the home. And I think in your testimony, Mr. Policron, you indicate that the average condo cost is on a national average, is 27% less than what a home is. So it seems to me it would follow that it would be a logical way for people to get into that first home and be able to get them to perhaps be able to rent it, and then to be able to get them some sort of a lease purchase arrangement to be able to own a property, to allow some inflation in it, to then be able to move on to another one. It seemed like a natural progression. I know that the English have figured out a way to get this done. I was just wondering if you had any comments on something like that. I'd like to work with you to come up with some ideas. This isn't in this bill, but I think it's something we need to take a look at it somewhere down the road. I know we've tried to enhance FHA's ability to expand and begin to loan more money and look more favorably on condos, and just like your thoughts on it.
Yeah, you know, they moved it from 234 to 203B years ago in order to expand financing in condominiums, yet we haven't had any relaxation of the rules since just a little bit in 2012. You know, if you look at it from another perspective, it is 27% cheaper in condominium pricing as far as single-family homes. But also that the down payment, which people sometimes have to save for 3 or 4 years to make, becomes less of a burden when you do condominium financing versus single-family home. So that too would add to it. We know that not only first-time home buyers, but seniors that are downsizing and going into condo financing, their permanent homes so they can use FHA, but only 4.2% of the portfolio is being used for condominiums at this time. It's certainly a market that we would love to work with to expand that number.
Appreciate your comments. I know you also had a comment in your testimony with regards to electronic filing system being improved for the certification process.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense especially in a smaller community where you don't have, you know, a manager running that development, to where you have to submit totally from scratch again every 2 years. And it's really an 18-month process because it takes 6 months to get it approved. So basically, we'd like to see the 2-year extended in that to perhaps 3 or 4 years, whatever we could, well, that doesn't sound right, whatever we could get.
You got a wish list, keep going here. That's fine.
But seriously, it's such a burden and cost as well to get that done. And what happens, it's so time-consuming that the small HOA or POA just say, oh, to heck with it, 60% decline rate anyway, I won't take the time to do it.
One of the problems is it's manually done, and FHA is looking, or HUD is, for their FHA program, is looking for some more money for the electronic, across the board, electronic opportunities, and that hasn't been forthcoming, so it's a problem. I recognize it, but I appreciate the comment that you made. I'm going to stop right there. The gentleman from Delaware, do you have any follow-up? I'd recognize your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually do have a quick follow-up of a question I mentioned at the very end, the continuum of care grant and the priority or bias, if you will, towards what they call rapid permanent rehousing. Is there anybody on the panel who could, apparently there is a priority given in states for permanent housing, and what the effect on my little state of Delaware has been to end up defunding very important transitional housing programs where somebody who is homeless has some of the issues that homeless folks do with drug addiction and substance abuse and family issues, comes into transitional housing, kind of gets things sorted out, and then kind of moves to the next step. The bias now is to the development of get somebody in a home permanently and then work on those, or allow them to work on those problems. The effect is a funding one, right, ultimately, but I'd just be interested in anybody who has a perspective on that. I see.
Yeah, I'm a past chair of the Continuum of Care in Jackson County and have reallocated transitional programs to rapid rehousing and also operate transitional housing programs. I'm not familiar with Delaware's operation, so when you said defunded, I'm not sure if that meant the Continuum did not put that program in either Tier 1 where they would be funded, or if there was a reallocation process whereby voluntarily the program, as I have in one of my transitional programs, opted to reallocate from a transitional program into a rapid rehousing program.
So the effect of the scoring process meant
then that was
the transitional program lost $300,000 of support that they were getting. Ministry of Caring, Kevin knows the folks very well, to a program that was doing great work. I mean, again, we're talking about a world of scarce resources, and they have to go somewhere, and they went to a place where it was more permanent housing. Didn't have any of the transitional substance abuse programs that go along with it.
In most cases, excuse me.
So some of that happens at the local level where they have the committee, but they argue that that priority is coming down from the feds on that. And I see somebody shake. I can't read your name.
It's Heather Bradley Geary. Sorry, I feel very passionate about this subject.
So do I.
Yes, and I think we have different feelings on the passion about it. So transitional housing, although I'm not saying the program isn't great because it probably is, but the data does not support transitional housing. So a long time ago, HUD had transitional housing as one of their funding priorities, that somebody could be in housing for 24 months, then they move on. As you're saying, the data does not support it. It does not work.
Well, you know, this goes back maybe to the question that we had before about moving to work. Maybe it doesn't work everywhere.
Right.
But there are places where things work differently. We like to think we're different in Delaware. And we are. We're a small state. Yeah. You know, we're a manageable state, and in that sense, we can count the people, okay, and where they've gone and whatever. When we're that small, we're one district. I'm the one guy we get down here, one person that we get down here. And so, you know, the effect has been some significant problems for some of the most effective programs that we have in dealing with homeless populations.
So if I may,
sure.
So HUD had...
Jump in, particularly if you're on my side of the question.
Okay,
you know?
I might have a different view as well. But HUD has been pushing COCs, continuum of care, to do increased rapid rehousing for multiple populations. So because there simply aren't enough resources, there are not enough beds in emergency shelters, there's not enough supportive housing for higher need populations. And what has happened is been a conversion to rapid rehousing programs. And as Heather said, the HUD right now has done a study on the differences of comparing transitional housing outcomes, rapid rehousing outcomes, and permanent subsidies for homeless families. And the outcomes between transitional housing and permanent subsidies for families, it's incredible. The difference in the outcomes, the well-being outcomes for the families is so much better in permanent housing than in the transitional housing, and it's cheaper. And, you know, and that kind of, you know, HUD has been rethinking this, but that's not to say that there aren't different markets are going to have different housing needs. And permanent supportive housing doesn't mean a person has to stay there permanently. Ideally, they would not. They would address their underlying issues and then eventually be able to move on to a independent living situation. But the housing...
My time is way up. So
Sorry.
Finish.
Oh, I was just going to say the housing is supposed to be made permanent, so people can, who are in crisis, come in and get the supportive services they need, and that system is going to be so much cheaper than to the emergency health systems, to the criminal justice, the jail system, and to detox centers.
May I just say one more thing on that? I'm so sorry. There's been continuum of care have been brought up a lot lately, and this is a time of major changes and you probably heard in continuum of care. It was unheard of before in many spaces, in many times that programs would be defunded. So I think everybody over the past 3 years is really trying to figure out how this is going to work nationwide, as well as within our communities. So we all are trying to do a much better job of prioritizing, communicating within our communities, doing it well in advance of the NOVA, which you should, not when the funding comes down. So I will say there certainly have probably been any number of cases where that hasn't hasn't been handled appropriately. It is correct that per capita, there almost is nothing more expensive short of group homes than transitional housing. It's very appropriate for certain populations, very appropriate in many ways. We would have sat here 10 years ago, and what you would have heard is that HUD's preference was for transitional housing over permanent housing. I happened to raise $4 million to renovate 24 units of family transitional housing 8 years ago because I thought that was a good idea. Luckily, now I'm able to use them for vets. So my point is, it goes back to that larger question about prioritization. And so let me just share with you very quickly. In 1 year, in the 2 traditional HUD transitional family programs I operated, I had 88 families enter. Of those 88 families, 56 were not street or shelter homeless. They came from living with their families. Well, doubled up is not comfortable. I understand that. But it isn't the same. And I also would say when I have folks who are trying to get vouchers from the Housing Authority come to my program and want homeless letters, they're living with their family, and I'm like, I understand that's uncomfortable. I can't give you a homeless letter. But I asked my staff, of those 56 families who came from living with family or friends, did we ask them, did they have other resources that we could exercise with them so they didn't have to come into shelter, and we could make sure that we were prioritizing those spaces for families who were in fact street and shelter because there just aren't enough resources. We all are now starting to see diversion.
Mr. Chairman,
service.
thank you so much. I'm
getting
way over, and I'm not even on the committee. God bless you.
Sorry.
That's okay. I understand. There was a great question, and it was a great answer, and I appreciate your passion. With that, Mr. Cleaver has waived a second round of questioning. So with that, we'd like to thank our witnesses and our testimony today. We certainly appreciate your expertise, your advice, your counsel, and your passion for all of these issues and for the help that you've given us in developing the bill, for your ideas of improving the bill today. And we want to continue to work with each of you and your groups that you represent to try and continue to make this the best bill and the best opportunity we have to pass something that's going to make a difference in the lives of a lot of people. So without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. I ask our witness to please respond as promptly as you can. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.